My name is Evelyn Reed, but most people call me Evie. I'm 62, a lifelong resident of this quaint town nestled in the heart of Iowa. While many have sought opportunities elsewhere, I remained. I grew up here, built my career here, and now, simply exist here. I never anticipated narrating my life story in this manner. Yet here I find myself, a simple woman, leading a life of quiet simplicity. My occupation is at the local convenience store attached to a gas station. Nothing glamorous. My responsibilities include scanning groceries, brewing coffee, and engaging in casual conversations with regulars, typically discussing the weather or local happenings. I've dedicated over 35 years to this unassuming role. It's not exhilarating, but it provides a steady income, and that's all I ever realistically sought. My days often meld together, blurring into an indistinguishable sequence, leaving me occasionally pondering the trajectory of my life, a life quite different from the one I envisioned. However, I avoid complaining. I didn't enjoy an affluent upbringing, so I've become accustomed to managing with what I have. Financial prosperity was never my primary motivation. I've always strived to perform my best, care for others, and remain unassuming. Perhaps this explains my current circumstances. Future aspirations rarely occupied my thoughts. I had anticipated retirement, perhaps some modest travel, and a period of relaxation. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. I've accumulated many years, and at times I reflect on them as a prelude to this particular juncture in my life. 30 a.m., I prepared his breakfast, assisted with his homework, and provided whatever he required. It wasn't effortless, but it was profoundly rewarding. He was my purpose, my reason for being. My love for him was immeasurable, and I believed it was sufficient. When Samuel embarked on his college journey, I optimistically envisioned a resumption of my personal life. I anticipated time for self-discovery and personal pursuits. But just as I began contemplating retirement, Samuel returned home after a difficult romantic separation. I didn't hesitate. I welcomed him back, thinking, this is my calling. I was determined to help him regain his footing. I could continue being the mother he needed. Yet, everything shifted dramatically upon his meeting with Jessica. I recall vividly the day he introduced her to me. She possessed an effervescent personality, and Samuel appeared happier than I had witnessed in many months. They were undeniably charming together, and I endeavored to be supportive. However, something about the way he spoke of her felt different, distinct. It felt as though he had emotionally distanced himself from me, leaving me grappling with my feelings. He began dedicating more time to Jessica, neglecting our time together. He'd go out with her, leaving me alone at home, and this pattern became increasingly noticeable. A chasm developed between us, and I struggled to understand its cause. Perhaps I was overly suspicious, but the sensation of losing him intensified. I remember one evening, not long ago, when he casually announced, "Mom, Jessica and I have discussed it, and we believe it's time for me to move in with her. We're beginning our apartment search." I felt paralyzed, but concealed my distress. I offered a reassuring, "That's wonderful, Samuel," but inwardly, I felt as though I was fading, becoming obsolete, unnecessary. That evening, seated at the kitchen table, gazing at the empty chair opposite me, a realization dawned, a truth I had long feared confronting. My son was no longer my son, in the way I understood. He had progressed to a new phase of life, leaving me behind. The days following Samuel's announcement felt peculiar, as if the atmosphere in the house had grown denser. I continued setting the table for two, despite the evident fact I was the sole occupant. I rationalized it, telling myself it was merely a phase in his journey toward independence. However, the silence between us, amplified, palpable with every step I took through the house. He was physically present, yet emotionally absent. He'd return home, but his attention remained consistently fixated on his phone, constantly texting or speaking with her. I resisted admitting it, but it caused me considerable pain. One morning, I prepared pancakes, his favorite, and set the table as usual. I waited patiently, anticipating his emergence from his room, hoping for a moment of shared silence. As in the past, hours elapsed. The pancakes grew cold. My phone remained silent. No messages, no calls. It felt as though he had forgotten how to be a son. Around noon, I heard the front door open. Samuel entered, his face flushed from the cold, but his gaze lacked the familiar warmth. The customary smile was absent. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice flat, devoid of affection, as if addressing a stranger. I remained standing, holding a plate of pancakes, momentarily feeling like an intruder in my own kitchen. "Oh, hey, Samuel," I replied, attempting to mask the emptiness in my voice. I made your favorite. He didn't even glance at the pancakes. He retrieved a bottle of water from the refrigerator and drank deeply. I'm meeting Jessica and some friends at a cafe. I'll be back later, he stated, his tone distracted. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and departed. I remained standing, the plate in my hands, staring at the vacant chair. The feeling was akin to a physical blow. I was bewildered. Was I expected to be joyful for him? Proud? Was this the essence of motherhood? Sacrificing everything, only to witness your child's gradual departure? I didn't know, but I felt utterly useless, as if a part of me was being erased. The subsequent days followed a similar pattern. Samuel would return home late, finding me asleep. I'd awaken to the sound of him preparing to leave, but even a simple good morning or a hug were absent. I attempted to remain composed. He was an adult. He had his own life, but the loneliness intensified with each passing day. Then, one evening, Samuel returned with Jessica. A smile graced her face, as if she were bestowing a favor by being there. They entered, hand in hand, laughing about something I couldn't discern. I stood in the hallway, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Jessica looked at me, her smile faltering, as if uncertain of my approval. "Hello, Mrs. Reed," she offered, her politeness almost overly forced. I managed a strained smile, suppressing the sting of her words. "Hello, Jessica. How is everything?" I asked, maintaining a civil tone. "Fine," she responded, glancing at Samuel. We were considering a drive later. Samuel mentioned he didn't mind us borrowing the car. I froze. Borrow the car? They hadn't even asked. I was aware the car was always available for Samuel's use, but he hadn't even bothered to seek my permission. His mother's. My heart sank. Samuel seemed oblivious. He was busy removing his coat, discussing their plans with Jessica. I observed him, this man who had once relied on me, now standing before me like a stranger. His attention was entirely focused on her, his new family, a family of which I was no longer a part. "I'll be upstairs if you need me," I whispered, retreating to my room, leaving them to their conversation. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling. How had this happened? In an instant I had been the center of Samuel's world. Now I was merely someone he barely acknowledged. I couldn't even recall the last time he had expressed his love. The weight of years of sacrifice, the dinners I had prepared, the long nights spent worrying about him, crushed me like a tidal wave. I stared at a photograph on my dresser, Samuel and me on a family vacation when he was young. We were laughing, his head resting on my shoulder. He looked so happy, so innocent. That was then. This was now, and in this present moment, I was unnecessary. The morning after Samuel and Jessica's departure, I found myself staring at the familiar table I had set for years. The chairs, the plates, everything was in its accustomed place, yet the house felt different, empty. I was weary, exhausted, in a way I couldn't articulate. Perhaps it was the sleepless nights spent wondering about Samuel's whereabouts, the pervasive silence that had engulfed the house, or the realization that I had truly lost him. I tried to resume my routine, going to work, grabbing coffee at the diner, counting the minutes until I could return home and sit in silence. But nothing felt right. The spark was extinguished. I couldn't even remember the last time I had engaged in a self-indulgent activity. I felt like a ghost in my own life. Then, one evening, Samuel returned unexpectedly. The door opened, and there he was, appearing tired but resolute. He spoke little initially, merely uttering the usual "Hey Mom," as he dropped his bag. I sensed something was imminent. That feeling of the ground shifting beneath your feet, a feeling of helplessness. I experienced that. "Mom, I've been reflecting," Samuel began, his voice unusually serious. I froze. I knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. He had that look, the one that signaled something important, and I anticipated disliking what he had to say. "What about?" I asked, striving to maintain composure, though anxiety was already rising. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands neatly folded. "Jessica and I have been discussing." He paused. "The house," he continued. "We've decided it's time for you to." He hesitated. "Well, to downsize." I blinked, uncertain I had heard correctly. "Downsize?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The air seemed to leave the room. "What do you mean downsize?" Samuel sighed. "It's simply too large for you, Mom. You don't require all this space. You're getting older, and I don't want you living here alone. We believe a smaller residence would be preferable." Initially I struggled to process his words. So you want me to sell the house? My voice cracked, and I quickly cleared my throat, attempting to regain control. He nodded, avoiding eye contact. Yes, I believe that's the best course of action. I yearned to scream, to tell him I wasn't prepared to relinquish everything I had built here, everything that had been a part of my life for so long. But the words caught in my throat. Silence ensued, lasting an eternity, as I stared at my son, attempting to comprehend what had transpired. Samuel, this house, it's everything to me. It's not merely a dwelling, it's my life, I stated, my hands trembling. I raised you here. We've shared countless memories here. How can you simply make this decision for me? Samuel finally looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I detected something in his eyes. Regret? Perhaps guilt, but it was momentary. I understand it's difficult, Mom, but it's truly what's best. For both of us, you need to consider your future. And Jessica and I, we're moving forward. We can't postpone this any longer. And just like that, I was left with the hollow echo of his words. He wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it for himself. He didn't want the burden of a mother who needed him. He desired to build his own life with Jessica, a life that no longer required me. I stared at him, my heart breaking in a way that felt physical. So that's it? I asked, my voice trembling. You're simply going to sell the house? No discussion? No consideration for my feelings? I'm doing this for your own good, Mom, he said, his voice distant, almost robotic. It's time for you to move on. I rose abruptly, unable to remain seated. I don't need to move on, Samuel, I declared, my voice gaining strength with each word. I've lived here my entire life. I've given everything for you, and now you're discarding me, as if I'm insignificant. Samuel looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm not discarding you, Mom. This is for the best. You'll see. It's time for you to move on. The reality struck me like a physical blow. He was gone. He had already moved on, leaving me to grapple with my identity without him. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was where I had poured my heart into raising him, where I had given every ounce of my love and every moment of my life. And now, it meant nothing to him. I collapsed into the chair, my hands gripping the table. I had sacrificed so much for him, yet he had moved on without a second thought. The following days felt like navigating through a fog, everything moving in slow motion. Samuel's words reverberated in my ears, like a persistent bell I couldn't silence. It's for your own good, Mom. This phrase replayed endlessly, each repetition cutting a little deeper. I maintained appearances, going to work, cleaning the house, engaging in small talk with customers, anything to prevent my mind from spiraling. But nothing felt right. The silence in the house was deafening. The empty chair at the kitchen table, the untouched pancakes, everything was a constant reminder of my solitude. I stopped setting the table for two. It felt wrong, like clinging to a past that no longer existed. I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. The prospect of downsizing, of moving into a tiny apartment, sickened me. I couldn't simply relinquish everything I had built here, everything I had given to Samuel, but something else gnawed at me. I began noticing small details. His belongings were disappearing, gradually. He was removing his possessions, his guitar, his old textbooks, the jacket he wore as a child. Everything was vanishing. He was slowly erasing himself from the life we had supposedly shared. It wasn't until I went into the attic to retrieve some old Christmas decorations that I discovered it, his journal. It was tucked away in a box beneath some old clothing. I don't know why I picked it up. Perhaps it was the need to find something, anything, that could explain where I had gone wrong. Or maybe I simply wanted to hold on to a piece of the son I thought I knew. I don't think I can continue this. Mom has become too much. I can't balance her and Jessica. I know she's trying her best, but she doesn't understand. She's suffocating me. I need to break free. I stared at the words. They hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had been suffocating him. I had spent my life ensuring he had everything he needed, but apparently, it was never enough. I was no longer just his mother. I was an obligation. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't breathe. He had written about me, as if I were a burden, a weight he had to carry. The very son I had given everything to, my time, my love, my sacrifices, now viewed me as a problem. I wanted to scream, to throw the journal across the room, but I simply sat there, clutching it to my chest, letting the weight of his words sink in. I was a failure. I had tried so hard, but in the end, I wasn't enough for him. I wasn't enough for anyone. The worst part was the realization that the house, the one place I thought I could hold on to, wasn't even mine anymore. It was his. It had always been his. The moment he had decided to move on, to leave me for Jessica, I had lost everything. This house wasn't just a house to me. It was where I had poured all my love, all my heart, all my efforts. But to Samuel, it was something to sell, something to discard. I set the journal down and ran my hands over my face, trying to wipe away the tears. I had raised him to be independent, to have his own life, but I never imagined it would come at the cost of losing my own. I didn't know who I was anymore. I could feel the weight of my emotions pressing down on me, but I couldn't let it break me. I had been too strong for too long to allow this to destroy me. I had given up everything for him, but now, it was time to consider what I wanted. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to sit here and let him walk all over me. I had a life to live, even if he didn't want to be a part of it anymore. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. No one was going to make me feel insignificant, not even my son. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but one morning, after a particularly sleepless night, I decided to do something for myself. I had spent so many years putting my life on hold, trying to hold everything together for Samuel, for the house, for everyone but me. I had given up on dreams of travel, of living a life that was solely mine. But now, looking at the empty rooms and the quiet house, I realized something. It was time to stop waiting. I was at work as usual, when I noticed something unusual, a flyer affixed to the bulletin board near the coffee machine. It was a local charity raffle, offering a cash prize to the winner. The prize wasn't substantial, but it ignited something within me. I could use that money. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the possibility of regaining control of my life, even in a small way. I remember thinking, why not? So I completed the form, purchased a ticket, and tucked it into my pocket, barely giving it a second thought. It was a minor distraction from the turmoil in my mind. But then, a week later they called. I had won, a small sum, yes, but it was the first genuinely self-serving act I had undertaken in years. For a brief moment, it felt like a breath of fresh air, a reprieve from the heavy, suffocating silence I had been enduring. I could do something with this. Maybe not much, but I could finally make a move. I didn't inform Samuel. In fact, I hadn't spoken to him since the conversation about downsizing. He had become unresponsive, and I wasn't going to pursue him. I was finished. If he wished to exclude me from his life, so be it, but I wasn't going to sit idly by, awaiting his realization of the hurt he had inflicted. I was going to use this win to do something for myself. With the raffle winnings, I decided to take a long overdue step. I contacted a local real estate agent, initially just to browse. I wasn't ready to sell the house, not yet, but perhaps I could begin exploring apartments, smaller spaces, maybe a cozy cottage near the park. I didn't need much, just a change of scenery. The first apartment I viewed was a modest studio on the outskirts of town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, a place where I could breathe. No more traversing that large house alone, surrounded by memories of a life I no longer recognized. The thought of leaving it behind tightened my chest, but it also provided a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps that's what I needed, something small and quiet, just for me. I paid a deposit that afternoon. That evening, I wandered through the house, touching familiar objects. The old wooden kitchen chair, where I used to sit with Samuel, discussing school and life. The worn-out living room couch, where we had watched movies together. These things, these memories were fading, but I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. They didn't define who I was. I was more than just Samuel's mother, more than the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. I decided then that it was time to let go. I wasn't going to let my life be defined by someone else's choices anymore. Samuel had moved on. He had his life, and I needed to find mine again. I needed to remember who I was outside of the roles I had played for so long. The next day, I began packing. Not for the apartment, not yet, but for myself. I packed away old items, pictures, trinkets, anything that linked me to a past I was ready to leave behind. I discarded unnecessary items. I didn't want to cling to memories that no longer served me. I realized I wasn't just packing up a house. I was packing up a life I no longer wished to live. I had lived for everyone else for so long. It was time to live for myself. The decision was final. I had signed the lease for the small studio apartment, a place that felt increasingly like my own with each passing day. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally doing something for myself. But there was still something within me, something I had been suppressing for years, slowly resurfacing. I devoted the next few days to clearing out the house, packing up Samuel's remaining belongings. It felt surreal, emptying the rooms of his possessions, all the things he had taken for granted. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was about reclaiming my life. I had given so much, but now I needed to take something back. The process wasn't easy. It was physically and emotionally exhausting. Every box I packed brought back memories I hadn't realized I still possessed. The day of Samuel's first soccer game, his first crush, his first heartbreak. All those moments that had once been everything to me now felt like distant echoes. But this time I didn't cry. I couldn't. Crying was something I had done too much of already. I had wasted too much time, hoping, waiting for something that would never come. Now I had to create my own life, one where I wasn't just Samuel's mom, where I wasn't defined by what others needed from me. I started doing things for myself, things I hadn't done in years. I went to the park, sat by the lake, and simply listened to the wind rustling the leaves. I took long morning walks, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, something I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy in ages. It was like awakening from a long sleep, finally remembering what it felt like to live for myself. I visited the local thrift store and purchased a few new items for the apartment. Nothing extravagant, just some throw pillows, a few bookshelves, a new coffee maker. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I was building something from scratch, something I could call my own, and it felt good. Then, one day, I decided to visit the gas station, where I had worked for so long. I hadn't informed anyone I was leaving, and honestly, I wasn't sure what I would say when I saw the familiar faces. But I needed to close that chapter of my life, to release the routine that had held me captive for so long. The moment I stepped into the store, everything felt different. The same smells, the same worn shelves, but something was missing. I was missing. I wasn't just the woman behind the counter anymore. I was someone else, someone with a future beyond the counter, beyond the endless days of checking out customers, of being invisible. Patricia, the manager, looked up from the cash register when I entered. "Evie, hey, you're back. I thought you were taking some time off." I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. "Yes, I'm finished here," I said, the words flowing more easily than I anticipated. "I have a new place. I'm moving on." She stared at me, blinking, for a moment, then exclaimed, "You mean like really moving on? For good?" I nodded. "For good," she smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "Well, I wish you all the best, Evie. You deserve it." I thanked her, and left, my heart pounding, but in a good way. I was free, no longer standing in the shadows, waiting for something that wasn't coming. As I walked out of the store, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just leaving a job, I was leaving a life that had held me in place for too long. And I wasn't just walking away from Samuel, I was walking away from the idea of being trapped in the role I had played for so long. I wasn't going to be just a mother anymore. I was going to be me. The apartment was beginning to feel like home, though it still had a new, unfamiliar air. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but it was mine. I had spent the last few weeks settling in, establishing new routines, taking long walks, and finding peace in my own company. I was learning how to enjoy my own life again, even in small ways. For the first time in ages, I wasn't running on empty. But then, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't even sure I wanted anyone. But when I peered through the peephole, I saw him, Samuel. His face looked different, older somehow, but his eyes, those same eyes that had once looked up at me, with trust and love, were still there. For a moment, I froze. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Anger, sadness, relief, a little of all three perhaps. But what I felt most was confusion. I had moved on. I was building something new for myself. And now, here he was, back again, appearing as if he hadn't just shattered me into 1,000 pieces. I opened the door. His gaze softened when he saw me, but a nervousness I hadn't anticipated was evident in his posture. He shifted on his feet, looking like he didn't know whether to hug me or flee. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice uncertain. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, remaining silent initially. I didn't know what I could say to him. The words felt trapped in my throat. I gestured for him to enter, unsure what kind of reception he anticipated. Samuel sat on the couch, shifting uncomfortably as I sat opposite him. We stared at each other for a moment, the silence stretching between us. I couldn't help but notice how different he looked. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, as if unsure of his own decisions. Or maybe it was the way his hands fidgeted, as if he didn't know how to grasp the moment. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "I know I've hurt you, I've messed up your life, I could feel my heart beginning to beat faster. This wasn't the Samuel I knew. This wasn't the son who had taken me for granted, the one who had barely looked at me when he was home. This was something else. I let out a long breath. You've hurt me more than words can express, Samuel. You don't even comprehend the extent of it. You walked out of my life without a second thought. You cast me aside for someone who didn't even know what you meant to me. I didn't intend to hurt you, Samuel said, his eyes meeting mine, no longer avoiding my gaze. But I was confused. I was lost. And Jessica, she made me feel like I was finally in control of my life. I thought I was doing the right thing. I could hear the guilt in his voice, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo what had been done. I didn't need his apology. I needed him to see what he had done, truly see it. I needed him to understand that the mother he had left behind wasn't the same woman anymore. I stood up, pacing the room. You think that simply because you apologize, everything will be all right. You think you can return here and make me forget how you discarded me, as if I didn't matter. Samuel stood up as well, his hands outstretched, almost pleading. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mom. I know it will take time, but I'm trying. I truly am. I turned to face him, my heart racing. Time? You think you have time to fix everything? I don't need you to fix me, Samuel. I've already begun to fix myself, and you don't get to re-enter my life, simply because things didn't work out with Jessica. A long silence followed as he stared at me, his face contorted in a mix of regret and confusion. So that's it? You're just going to shut me out like this, after everything I've done? I shook my head. No, Samuel. I'm not shutting you out. I'm shutting out the version of you who only sought me out when it was convenient. I'm done being someone's fallback. I'm not your safety net anymore. He didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, his face pale, his hands hanging at his sides. I could see the hurt in his eyes, and maybe, just maybe, I saw a flicker of understanding. But I wasn't ready to let him back in. Not yet. You can't come back here and pretend like nothing happened, I said softly, my voice steady. I'm moving forward, and if you want to be a part of my life again, you're going to have to earn it. But you need to understand something. My life doesn't revolve around you anymore. Samuel looked down at the floor for a moment, then back up at me. I understand, Mom. I do. I wish I could take it all back. I stood there, holding his gaze. I know you do, but you can't. All we can do now is move forward. With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his shoulders slumped. I watched him leave, remaining still, as the sound of the closing door echoed in the quiet apartment, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to come back and fix things. I wasn't waiting for him to see my worth. I had finally realized it myself. I was worth more than the scraps he left behind. The next few days were a blur. Samuel's visit lingered in my mind, but I didn't dwell on it for long. I had spent enough time waiting for something to change, for him to finally realize how much he had hurt me. But now, I understood that waiting for someone else to fix things wasn't the answer. It was up to me to rebuild, to take control of my life again. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of excitement. I was done living in the past. I was done clinging to a life that had been taken from me. But just when I thought I was moving on, life threw me another curveball. I was at the grocery store, picking up a few items for the week. I had already fallen into the routine of shopping for myself, no longer picking up extra food for Samuel, or considering his preferences. I was buying what I liked, and it felt liberating. As I stood in line at the checkout, I saw someone I hadn't expected. Jessica. She was standing a few feet away, examining some fruit. She hadn't noticed me yet, but I couldn't stop myself from watching her. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and the last time we spoke, she had been polite but distant. Something about her always made me uneasy, as if there was something she wasn't saying, something I wasn't seeing. But in that moment, I felt a flicker of something else. Perhaps it was the way she seemed so at ease, so confident, as if she had everything under control. Or maybe it was the way I could still feel Samuel's absence hanging between us like a ghost. I didn't want to create a scene, didn't want to confront her in a crowded store, but I couldn't help myself. I grabbed my cart and slowly walked over to her, unsure what I was going to say. When she saw me, she straightened up, and the smile on her face didn't quite reach her eyes. "Linda," she said, almost too sweetly, "I didn't expect to see you here." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Jessica, it's been a while." She nodded, glancing over her shoulder to see if anyone was watching. "Yes, I suppose it has." There was a brief silence before she spoke again, her tone softening. "How have you been?" The question felt too calculated, too rehearsed. I knew she wasn't genuinely inquiring about my well-being. It was merely a polite gesture. But I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her, taking in the way she stood there, as if she possessed all the answers. "I've been fine," I finally said, my voice steady. "Just adjusting to things, moving forward." She nodded, but I could see a flicker of something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite decipher. "That's good. Samuel has been quite worried about you. He feels terrible about how things ended." I almost laughed. Worried about me? Samuel didn't worry about me. He hadn't even given it a second thought before deciding to leave. But I kept my thoughts to myself. "I'm sure he does," I said coolly. "But Samuel needs to figure things out for himself now. He's an adult, Jessica. He has his own life to live." She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I know, but sometimes it's hard to maintain balance. Samuel isn't the easiest person to deal with, and I think he's been under a lot of pressure. I believe he needs you." The word stung more than I expected. Samuel needs me, the same Samuel who had left me for Jessica, the one who had cast me aside without a second thought. I had been his entire world, and now I was just another item for him to juggle. But instead of allowing her to witness my hurt, I took a deep breath and smiled. "Well, Jessica, I think we both know what Samuel needs. He's made his choice, and I'm not going to plead for a place in his life anymore." She blinked at me, clearly taken aback by my response. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I turned on my heel and walked toward the checkout, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what had prompted me to confront her like that, but as I walked out of the store, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't worried about losing Samuel or fighting for his love. I had fought enough. As I got into my car and drove back to my apartment, I realized something. Jessica, for all her charm, wasn't the one who had taken control of my life. It wasn't Samuel either. It was me, and that was the most empowering feeling I had ever experienced. It's remarkable how rapidly life can change when you finally stop waiting for someone to return and fix things, when you stop clinging to things that were never meant to last. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was standing still. I was moving forward, towards something new, something I could call my own. The days following my conversation with Jessica felt lighter. The weight I had been carrying for months, maybe years, began to lift, like a heavy coat I no longer needed. I was no longer clinging to the version of myself that had been Samuel's mother, the one who had sacrificed everything for a son who couldn't even recognize her worth. I was finished with that role. I spent the following days focusing entirely on myself. I painted the walls of my new apartment in colors I liked, not colors Samuel would have chosen, or that reminded me of the house where I had raised him. I spent long evenings reading, something I hadn't done in years. I walked by the lake again, breathing in the fresh air without worrying about who I was leaving behind. But even as I embraced my newfound freedom, a quiet anger simmered beneath the surface. I wasn't just going to move on from Samuel and Jessica. I had spent too many years being overlooked, taken for granted, and discarded. I wasn't going to let them forget about me. I wasn't going to let them think they could simply walk away without consequences. It was time to make them see that I was more than the person they could utilize when convenient, more than the mother who had given everything only to be discarded when it suited them. I still possessed something they hadn't anticipated, and I was going to use it to send a message. I contacted a lawyer, not for a lawsuit or anything dramatic. No, this was personal. I had been too silent for too long. Now it was time for them to understand that I was not someone to be forgotten. I knew Samuel would attempt to challenge me. I knew he would try to convince me I was being unreasonable, that I was merely clinging to the past. But the truth was, he no longer got to dictate the direction of my life. I did. The lawyer was discreet, and we ensured everything was handled quietly. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. No dramatic confrontations or shouting matches. No, this was something different, something more profoundly satisfying. I sold the house Samuel had believed he could claim without a second thought. I didn't merely sell it. I ensured the sale was structured to benefit me, providing a small measure of security for my future, a life I could build without them. A small business, a cafe in fact, a charming little coffee shop by the lake where people could relax, read, and converse, just as I had envisioned for myself all those years ago. It was something solely for me. It wasn't for Samuel. It wasn't for Jessica. It was mine. As I signed the paperwork for the cafe, a wave of satisfaction washed over me, not because I had beaten them, but because I had finally begun living for myself. Mom, I want to talk. I've been reflecting on everything. And I'm sorry. I didn't intend to hurt you. It wasn't a surprise. Not really. I knew he would return. He would attempt to make amends, to rectify things in the manner he believed would make everything right. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had already moved on. I didn't respond to his message. I didn't need to. I had already conveyed everything I needed to say through my actions, through the life I was building. I wasn't going to revert to being the person who waited for someone to change. Not anymore. I stood at the counter of my new cafe, sipping my coffee as the first customers arrived. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at ease. Samuel and Jessica were still a part of my life, but they no longer controlled it. And that was a feeling I had never known before. I was no longer merely someone's backup plan. I was more than that. And for the first time, I realized that I was the one who possessed the power to shape my life. I had spent most of my life allowing other people to decide what was best for me. First, my parents, then Samuel, and even Jessica. In a way, I always believed I was doing the right thing, prioritizing everyone else's needs, sacrificing my own dreams for the people I loved. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of myself. Standing behind the counter of my new cafe, watching the sun set over the lake, I realized something. I hadn't just moved out of my old house, or started a new business. I had changed fundamentally, in a way that was entirely my own. This wasn't just about independence. It was about reclaiming my life. I'd spent so many years walking on eggshells, ensuring everyone around me was happy, but no one had ever taught me how to make myself happy. And now, I was learning. Every cup of coffee I brewed, every customer who walked through the door, was a reminder that I had built this. I had created something that was mine. I don't believe I could have accomplished this without the impetus Samuel provided. I don't think I could have reached this point if I hadn't been so profoundly hurt by the people I loved most. Perhaps that's what I needed, something to awaken me, to show me that I was more than just a caregiver, more than just a mother or a worker. When I first opened the cafe, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if people would come, if they would stay. But they did. People enjoyed the cozy atmosphere, the homemade pastries, and the tranquil location by the water. Regulars began arriving every morning, and the place gradually evolved into something genuine. And I didn't feel alone anymore. It was as if the universe was finally sending me signals that I was on the right path. One day, about a month after I opened the cafe, I saw Samuel walking by. He didn't see me at first. He was with Jessica, his arm around her waist as they strolled down the street. He looked happy, in a way I hadn't seen before. I noticed he was holding her hand the same way he used to hold mine. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the urge to yell at him or confront him. I simply watched him, and I realized something. I was okay. I wasn't going to wait for his apology anymore. I wasn't going to cling to the image of him I had constructed in my mind for so long. I had already forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go. I wasn't going to hold on to the pain, the anger, or the betrayal anymore. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. Jessica and Samuel didn't stop by the cafe that day, but I didn't mind. I didn't need to see them or prove anything to them. I walked to the back of the cafe, where the shelves were lined with journals, and sat down at the small desk I'd set up for myself. I pulled out a fresh notebook and began writing. I had always wanted to write stories, memories, anything that came to mind, but I never had time before. Now I did. I wrote about my life, about Samuel, about all the things I wished I'd said, and all the things I was finally ready to release. And then I wrote about the future, a future that was no longer defined by anyone else. It was mine now. I finished my cup of coffee and looked out the window. The sun had set, and the sky was turning that soft shade of purple I loved. The cafe was quiet now, and I could hear the faint sound of water lapping against the shore. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I didn't need Samuel's apology. I didn't need Jessica's validation. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough, because I had finally realized something. I was enough.